The Invisible Boy and the Strange Transfer Student. Marcus Chen had mastered the art of invisibility, not the kind involving quantum physics or light-bending technology, though he'd sketched theoretical designs for both in his notebooks, but the social kind that let a 13-year-old boy move through the hallways of Westlake Middle School without being noticed. It wasn't that Marcus was particularly small or nondescript. With his perpetually untamed black hair, thick-rimmed glasses that magnified his dark eyes, and the constant parade of sci-fi t-shirts that made up his wardrobe, he was actually quite distinctive. The invisibility came from years of careful social engineering, walking with his head down, speaking only when directly addressed, and developing a talent for blending into the background of any room. Being invisible had its advantages. Teachers rarely called on him despite his perfect grades. Bullies overlooked him in favor of more reactive targets, and best of all, no one disturbed him when he was reading quantum physics textbooks during lunch or tinkering with his latest invention beneath his desk. His father, a brilliant but distracted aerospace engineer who worked remotely for a lunar mining operation, barely registered Marcus's existence beyond ensuring he was fed and had access to the family workshop in their garage. His mother had left years ago, taking a position on one of the Mars colonies as an atmospheric specialist. She sent birthday messages that arrived weeks late due to signal delays, always ending with "Miss you, genius boy," as if that somehow made up for her absence. So Marcus built his life around his own private universe, winning science competitions no one at school acknowledged, maintaining his collection of dismantled electronics, and dreaming of the day he'd leave Earth behind for the stars. His only true friend was RTI, an AI assistant he'd cobbled together from salvaged parts and his own rudimentary coding. RTI lived in a modified tablet that Marcus carried everywhere, offering statistics, observations, and the closest thing to companionship he'd known. Probability of precipitation today is 12%, Marcus, RT's synthetic voice announced as Marcus trudged toward school one Monday morning. Atmospheric composition shows higher than average pollen count. Recommendation: avoid the east fields during physical education. Thanks, RTI, Marcus muttered, adjusting his backpack. Any other survival tips for today? Your history assignment on the Neo-Martian Cultural Revolution is due. Completed file is ready for submission. Also, the cafeteria's nutritional analysis indicates Mystery Meat Monday contains 43% more sodium than FDA recommendations. So, bring my own lunch. Got it. Marcus was so focused on RT's weather report that he nearly collided with Principal Hendricks, who stood at the school entrance with an unfamiliar figure. "Ah, Mr. Chen," Principal Hendricks said, causing Marcus to freeze in alarm, being directly addressed. Perfect timing. This is Lyra Nova, our new transfer student. Since you share all the advanced placement courses, would you mind showing her around today? Marcus stared, momentarily forgetting how to form words. The girl beside Principal Hendricks was unlike anyone he'd ever seen. She was tall and willowy with skin so pale it seemed to have a faint bluish undertone in the morning light. Her hair fell in cascading waves of silvery white, and her eyes. Marcus blinked twice to make sure he wasn't imagining it. Her eyes were a violet so deep they seemed to contain lights, like distant stars. Sure, he finally managed. Excellent, Principal Hendricks said, already walking away. Ms. Nova, you're in good hands with our resident genius. The girl, Lyra, tilted her head slightly, examining Marcus with those unsettling violet eyes. You are a genius? She asked, her voice melodic, but with an odd cadence, as if English wasn't her native language. No, Marcus said automatically. I mean, I just get good grades. Interesting, she replied. On my previous school, they did not use this classification system. Is genius a social rank or a genetic designation? Marcus blinked, uncertain if she was joking. Neither. It's just something people say when you're good at academics, I guess. I see. She nodded solemnly. Then I shall attempt to achieve this genius status as well. As Marcus led her toward their first class, he couldn't help noticing several unusual things about Lyra. She walked with an oddly formal posture, back perfectly straight, as if balancing an invisible book on her head. She seemed fascinated by the most mundane objects, pausing to examine water fountains and fire extinguishers with intense concentration. And every so often, he caught her looking up at the ceiling with a slight frown, as if searching for something. "Where did you transfer from?" Marcus asked as they settled into their advanced physics class. "Far away," she replied vaguely. "A private educational facility. This is my first experience with public instruction." Before Marcus could ask more questions, their teacher, Dr. Harrison, began the lesson on gravitational waves. To Marcus's surprise, Lyra raised her hand at almost every question, offering answers that went far beyond the curriculum, speaking about gravitational phenomena with the casual confidence of someone who had personally experienced interstellar travel. "That's quite advanced thinking, Ms. Nova," Dr. Harrison said after Lyra had corrected his explanation of gravitational lensing. "Perhaps you'd like to continue this discussion after class." Lyra blinked those star-filled eyes. "Have I violated a protocol?" No, Dr. Harrison assured her. "I'm just not accustomed to students who are familiar with postdoctoral level astrophysics." Marcus stared at her with newfound interest. Who was this girl? Throughout the day, similar scenes played out in every class. Lyra demonstrated eerily comprehensive knowledge of advanced mathematics and sciences, yet seemed completely baffled by basic social studies concepts and literature. When asked about Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet in English class, she had frowned deeply. "This narrative is historically inaccurate," she declared. "Human pair bonding rituals have never required such inefficient self-termination. The regulatory bodies would have intervened." By lunchtime, Marcus found himself sitting across from Lyra at an empty table, watching in fascination as she methodically dissected her cafeteria food without eating any of it. "Is this truly the standard nutritional supplement for developing humans?" she asked, poking at what the menu had optimistically called lasagna. "It's what they serve," Marcus shrugged, unwrapping his own packed lunch. "But most of us bring food from home." Lyra leaned forward suddenly, eyes fixed on his sandwich. "What is that substance?" "Peanut butter and jelly." Marcus offered her half. "Want to try it?" She took it gingerly, examining it from all angles before taking a tiny bite. Her eyes widened dramatically, and for the first time that day, she smiled, a radiant expression that transformed her strange features into something breathtaking. "This contains concentrated glucose and plant proteins," she declared. "It's pleasant." Marcus couldn't help smiling back. "It's just a sandwich. On my home, food is engineered for optimal nutritional value rather than sensory experience." She took another bite, closing her eyes appreciatively. "Sounds boring," Marcus said. "Efficiency is valued above pleasure," she replied matter-of-factly, then paused. "Though I am beginning to understand the appeal of your method." Over the next few weeks, Marcus found himself appointed as Lyra's unofficial guide to all things Earth. He explained idioms. "No, break a leg doesn't mean they want you to be injured." Cultural references. Star Wars is fiction, not historical documentation. And technology. "Yes, our computers are embarrassingly primitive by whatever standards you're used to." In return, Lyra seemed genuinely interested in Marcus's inventions and theories. She spent hours in his garage workshop, asking thoughtful questions about his designs, and occasionally making suggestions that were so brilliant they left him speechless. "Your propulsion concept is intriguing," she said one afternoon, examining his sketches for a theoretical spacecraft engine. "But if you adjusted the plasma containment field to account for quantum fluctuations, you could achieve 32.7% greater efficiency." Marcus stared at her. "How do you know that?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "Theoretical physics was a hobby of mine." Despite her oddities, or perhaps because of them, Marcus found himself growing attached to Lyra. She was the first person who seemed to truly see him, who found his interests fascinating rather than strange, who looked at him with those star-filled eyes, as if he were something special. But as their friendship deepened, strange incidents began to occur. Twice, Marcus spotted men in dark suits watching the school from across the street, their attention fixed on Lyra. Once, during their walk home, a black vehicle with unusually quiet engines followed them for several blocks before speeding away when Lyra suddenly changed direction. And then there was the incident in chemistry class, when the substitute teacher had asked Lyra a series of increasingly specific questions about her background. Lyra had grown tense, her normally perfect posture rigid with alarm, until suddenly all the Bunsen burners in the room flared simultaneously, causing enough chaos that the questioning stopped. Later, when Marcus asked her about it, she had smiled that odd, formal smile of hers. A fortunate coincidence, she said, though something in her voice suggested it had been anything but. One evening, as they sat on the roof of Marcus's house watching the stars, Lyra grew unusually quiet. "Your solar system is quite beautiful," she murmured. "Simple, but elegant." "Compared to what?" Marcus asked, seizing the opportunity to solve part of the mystery that was Lyra Nova. She turned those violet eyes toward him, something like sadness in their depths. "Marcus, if I told you I was not from here, would that change how you see me?" "You mean, like you're not from this country?" he asked, though he already suspected her answer would be far more complicated. "Not from this planet," she said softly. "Not from this solar system. Not even from this galactic sector." Instead of disbelief, Marcus felt a strange sense of relief. Finally, an explanation that made sense of all her oddities, her advanced knowledge, her confusion about human customs. "I knew you were different," he said. "Arte's been collecting data on you for weeks. Your body temperature fluctuates by several degrees throughout the day. You blink exactly once every 42 seconds. You know things no human should know." She smiled, a genuine expression of delight. "You were studying me." "You're the most interesting person I've ever met," he admitted, feeling heat rise to his cheeks. Lyra reached out and took his hand, her skin cool against his. "And you are the most interesting human I have encountered in my 16 cycles of existence." Before Marcus could ask any of the 1,000 questions exploding in his mind, a brilliant light split the night sky, a shooting star that moved with unnatural precision, growing larger by the second. Lyra's expression shifted to one of alarm. "They found me," she whispered, gripping his hand tighter. "Marcus, I haven't been entirely honest with you." "About being an alien?" he asked, still processing that revelation. "About who I am," she corrected, her eyes now fixed on the approaching light. "And why they're hunting me." The falling star was no longer falling but hovering, a craft of some kind descending toward them with predatory intent. Marcus felt his heart hammering in his chest, fear mingling with a strange exhilaration. "I think," he said, surprising himself with his calmness, "you'd better explain quickly. The truth among the stars. I am Lyra Astralis Nova Celestine, sovereign empress of the galactic hegemony, ruler of 843 star systems, and hereditary keeper of the quantum flame," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush even as she pulled Marcus to his feet. "And those are assassins sent by my uncle, Grand Vizier Corvin, who believes I am too young to rule and wishes to establish a regency until I come of age, which he has arbitrarily set at 60 solar cycles." Marcus stared at her, his brain struggling to process this information, while simultaneously calculating their escape options from the roof. "You're space royalty. Technically, my position is more constitutional than monarchical, but yes, that simplification will suffice for now." She glanced at the hovering craft, which had begun to emit a low, pulsing hum. "We need to leave immediately. Their neural disruptors will incapacitate us if we remain in range." "We?" Marcus squeaked. "I'm just a human kid." Lyra's expression softened momentarily. You're my friend, Marcus. The first real friend I've had outside the sycophants of court. I won't leave you to face their questioning. They wouldn't believe you know nothing." She looked around frantically. "Is there somewhere we can hide? Somewhere with technology I could use?" Marcus's mind raced. "My workshop in the garage. I've been working on some things that might help." Together they scrambled down from the roof, using the old oak tree as cover from the hovering craft. As they reached the ground, Marcus heard a sharp whine followed by a dull thud. Something had been fired at where they'd been sitting moments before. They sprinted across the yard, ducking behind his father's ancient hovercar. Marcus punched in the security code for the garage with shaking fingers, and the door slid open just enough for them to roll underneath. Inside, Marcus activated the security system he built himself. Nothing that would stop advanced alien technology, but enough to give them warning. Then he turned to Lyra, who was examining his workbench with critical interest. "So, Empress, huh?" he said, still trying to wrap his head around it all. "I was crowned at 7 cycles after my parents' ship was sabotaged," she said distractedly, picking up one of his half-finished inventions, a modified electromagnetic pulse generator. "I've been ruling with the Council of Elders until recently, when my uncle began suggesting I wasn't mature enough to handle interstellar politics. And you ran away. To Earth." Lyra looked up, her violet eyes flashing. "I didn't run. I strategically relocated while gathering allies. Earth is considered a primitive outpost, barely worth monitoring. It was the perfect place to hide while my loyalists consolidated power." She paused, setting down the device. "I didn't expect to be here so long. And I certainly didn't expect to meet someone like you." Marcus felt heat rising in his cheeks again, but forced himself to focus. "What do they want? Will they hurt you?" "Corvin wants me to abdicate, to sign over power to him as regent. He won't kill me. My genetic signature is required to access the hegemony's central systems, but he might place me in stasis until he figures out a way around that safeguard." She looked around the workshop. "Do you have communication equipment? Something I could modify to send a subspace signal?" Marcus pointed to a corner where his most ambitious project sat partially disassembled. "I've been trying to build a quantum entanglement communicator. It doesn't work yet, but the subatomic particle accelerator part is functional." Lyra's eyes widened. "You built this from Earth components?" She moved toward it with new respect. "Marcus, this is at least 2 centuries beyond your planet's current technology level. I had some ideas about manipulating quantum states to achieve instantaneous communication, regardless of distance." He mumbled, embarrassed by her praise. "It's just theoretical." "It's brilliant," she countered, already beginning to reconfigure components. "With some adjustments, I can use this to contact my royal guard. They can be here within 6 standard hours." A sudden crash from outside made them both jump. The garage security system flashed red. "Intruders detected." "We don't have 6 hours," Marcus said grimly. "What weapons do they have?" "Neural disruptors, gravitational manipulators, molecular destabilizers." Lyra listed, working frantically on the communicator. "Standard peacekeeping equipment." "Peacekeeping?" Marcus yelped. "That sounds like the opposite of peace." "Perspective is relative," Lyra murmured, connecting wires with practiced precision. "I need 3 more minutes to complete this transmission." Marcus looked around his workshop, mind racing through inventories of half-finished projects and theoretical designs. His eyes landed on the EMP generator Lyra had been examining earlier. "Would an electromagnetic pulse affect their technology?" he asked. "Minimally," she replied without looking up. "Their systems are quantum-shielded. What about a pulse modulated to specifically target quantum field generators?" He was already moving, grabbing components. Now Lyra did look up, surprise evident on her alien features. "That would actually be quite effective. But creating such a specifically calibrated pulse would require—" "I've been experimenting with quantum field theory for fun," Marcus interrupted, hands flying over circuitry. RT. Activate Protocol Omega. Authorization. Supernova. His AI assistant beeped to life from the tablet on his workbench. Protocol Omega activated. Quantum calibration circuits online. Warning. Power requirements exceed available supply by 342%. My ship's power core, Lyra said suddenly. It's miniaturized, but it can provide enough energy. It's in my pendant. She pulled a small crystal hanging from a chain around her neck. The garage door began to glow red-hot as something on the other side worked to melt through it. We have approximately 45 seconds, Lyra said with imperial calm that belied the fear in her eyes. Marcus worked furiously, connecting Lyra's crystal to his device. The moment the connection was complete, the crystal pulsed with brilliant blue light, and the makeshift quantum pulse generator hummed to life. It's charging, Marcus announced, but I don't know if it'll work on the first try. The garage door began to disintegrate, molecules separating as an advanced cutting tool sliced through it. Through the widening gap, Marcus could see armored figures, humanoid but with proportions slightly wrong, too tall and angular. Imperial forces, Lyra whispered. Elite Guard. They won't harm me, but they have no such restrictions regarding you. Comforting, Marcus muttered, adjusting final settings. Get behind me. When I activate this, there might be feedback. Marcus, Lyra said suddenly, grabbing his arm. If this doesn't work, I want you to know that these weeks on Earth, with you, have been the most freedom I've ever experienced. Thank you for seeing me, not just the Empress. Before Marcus could respond, the garage door exploded inward. 5 armored figures entered, weapons raised. Behind them stood a tall, aristocratic man with the same silvery hair as Lyra, though his was cropped short. His eyes were cold violet stars. Niece, he said, voice silky and dangerous. Your little adventure has caused quite enough trouble. It's time to return to your responsibilities. Uncle Corvin, Lyra replied, stepping forward with regal poise. How convenient that you personally came to rescue me rather than sending my actual royal guard. The tall man smiled thinly. I was concerned for your safety. This primitive planet could have harmed you. The only harm I've faced came from your assassins, she countered. Corvin's gaze shifted to Marcus, who stood frozen beside his half-built device. And what is this? A native pet you've acquired. How quaint. Something about the dismissive way he looked at Marcus sparked a flash of anger in Lyra's eyes. This human has shown more ingenuity and kindness than you ever have, Uncle. He built technology you would have thought impossible for his species. How charming, Corvin said, gesturing to his guards. Secure the Empress. Neutralize the human. One guard moved toward Lyra, while another raised a weapon toward Marcus. In that moment, Marcus locked eyes with Lyra and nodded once. He slammed his hand down on the activation switch. For a split second, nothing happened. Then a wave of energy erupted from the device, not visible except for a slight distortion in the air, like heat rising from pavement. It passed through everything in the garage harmlessly, except for the quantum-based alien technology. The guards' armor suddenly went rigid, locking them in place. Their weapons fell from paralyzed hands. Corvin himself gasped as something on his belt sparked and failed. What have you done? He hissed, trying to move but finding his exoskeleton-enhanced suit had become dead weight. Targeted quantum field disruption, Marcus explained, unable to keep the pride from his voice. Affects only technology operating on quantum uncertainty principles. Your stuff is basically frozen until the effect wears off in about 20 minutes. Lyra moved quickly, retrieving a small device from one of the immobilized guards. She pressed several controls, and a holographic display appeared. I'm transmitting our location to my actual royal guard, she said, eyes hard as she looked at her uncle. The Imperial Council will be interested to hear how you sent assassins after your Empress. You cannot rule, Corvin spat. You're a child playing at politics. I was born to rule, Lyra replied calmly. And unlike you, I understand that wisdom can come from unexpected places. She gestured to Marcus. This primitive human just outsmarted your elite forces using scraps from his workshop. Marcus stood straighter, feeling a strange mix of pride and terror. He'd just helped an alien empress defeat her would-be usurper. That wasn't exactly covered in career day at school. Within minutes, the air above the house shimmered, and a much larger vessel appeared, its design elegant and clearly built for diplomatic rather than military purposes. A beam of light appeared in the yard, and from it stepped a group of figures in ceremonial armor, their movements fluid and respectful as they approached Lyra. "Your Imperial Majesty," their leader said, dropping to one knee. "We received your distress signal. The Council has been informed of Vizier Corvin's treachery." "Captain Thelis," Lyra acknowledged with a nod. "Please secure the traitors and prepare them for transport to stand trial." As the royal guards efficiently collected Corvin and his immobilized forces, Lyra turned to Marcus, who stood awkwardly among the advanced alien technology, still holding his makeshift EMP device. "I must return," she said softly. "The hegemony needs stability, especially now." Marcus nodded, trying to hide his disappointment. "I understand. You're an empress. You have responsibilities. Probably lots of space politics and stuff." Lyra took his hands in hers. "The galactic hegemony has always maintained that Earth is too primitive for official contact, that humans aren't ready for the knowledge of interstellar civilization." "And what do you think?" Marcus asked. She smiled, those star-filled eyes bright with something that might have been affection. "I think the hegemony has underestimated humans, or at least one human in particular." Captain Thelis approached cautiously. "Your Majesty, we should depart before planetary authorities investigate the disturbance." Lyra nodded but didn't release Marcus's hands. "I have a proposition for you, Marcus Chen." "Me?" he squeaked. "The hegemony has a long tradition of cultural exchange programs, officially for studying anthropological development, but really to ensure we don't become too isolated in our thinking." Her formal tone softened. "I could use someone with your perspective at court. Someone who sees solutions where others see only problems." Marcus blinked. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you an adventure," she corrected. "As a special advisor to the Empress on innovative technologies and Earth relations. The position would include education opportunities beyond what your planet can provide, and of course, regular visits home to see your father." Marcus's mind raced through the implications. Leave Earth, travel among the stars, work with technology centuries beyond what he could access here. And most importantly, continue his friendship with Lyra. "What about school?" he asked weakly, unable to think of anything more substantial. Lyra laughed, a sound like crystal bells. "Marcus, you've already surpassed most of what your schools could teach you. But if credentials concern you, the hegemony's educational archives contain knowledge from 8,000 years of scientific advancement across hundreds of species. Put that way, it wasn't much of a choice. My dad might be confused when I tell him I'm transferring to a school off-planet." "We have protocols for such situations," Captain Thelis assured him. "A suitable explanation will be provided." Marcus looked around his workshop, at the half-built inventions and discarded components that had been his only friends before Lyra arrived. Then he looked at the stars visible through the damaged roof of the garage. "When do we leave?" he asked. Lyra smiled, transforming from the formal empress back into the friend he'd come to know over these past weeks. "Whenever you're ready." Marcus quickly gathered his most important inventions, his tablet containing RTI, and a few personal items. He left a note for his father, knowing the suitable explanation would follow, but wanting to say goodbye in his own words. As they stepped into the beam of light that would take them to Lyra's ship, Marcus felt a moment of doubt. What if I'm not good enough? What if I don't fit in among all those advanced species? Lyra squeezed his hand. "Marcus, you built a quantum pulse generator in your garage using spare parts. You outsmarted royal guards with centuries of tactical training. Trust me when I say this, It's not you who needs to worry about measuring up. The light enveloped them, lifting them toward the hovering ship and the stars beyond. As Earth fell away beneath them, Marcus felt a strange sense of rightness. All his life, he'd looked to the stars, dreaming of what might be out there. He'd never imagined that the stars would look back and find something in him worth taking along. 6 months later, the Galactic Hegemony formally established its first diplomatic outpost on Earth, citing remarkable advancements in quantum physics by certain young researchers as evidence of humanity's readiness for limited contact. Leading the diplomatic envoy was Special Advisor Marcus Chen, whose revolutionary work on quantum communication had already transformed interstellar correspondence throughout the hegemony. At his side stood Empress Lyra, her imperial regalia modified to include one seemingly out-of-place detail, a small Earth-made pendant containing half of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, perfectly preserved in quantum stasis as a reminder of where their friendship began. The Hegemony Council had been scandalized by their growing relationship, of course. An empress and a human from an unaffiliated world. Unprecedented. Potentially destabilizing. Diplomatically complex. Lyra had simply smiled that imperial smile of hers and reminded them of the ancient hegemony principle. Wisdom comes not from where we are born, but from how we choose to see the universe. And Marcus, no longer invisible but now one of the most recognized humans in galactic society, had proven that principle true with every new invention, every innovative solution, and every time he looked at the universe not as it was, but as it could be. Together, they stood at the dawn of a new era for both their peoples, a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simple courage to see someone who has always felt invisible.